The phone rings. It's 3 a.m. in London. The voice on the other end is calm, almost mechanical. Sell everything. Now. Within minutes, $10 billion in currency vanishes from the British pound. The Bank of England's reserves are bleeding out. 150 traders are executing the largest financial attack in history. By sunset, the United Kingdom will be on its knees. The government will be humiliated. And one man, a Hungarian refugee who survived the Holocaust, will walk away with over $1 billion. His name is George Soros. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. September 16th, 1992. A single day that cost the British taxpayers £3.3 billion. That's over $10 billion in today's money. More than the UK spent on its entire education system that year. Here's what's insane. This wasn't a war. No bombs, no tanks. Just numbers on screens and telephone calls between men in suits. Yet it brought the fifth largest economy on Earth to its knees in less than 12 hours. By the end of this video, you'll understand how currency markets really work, why governments can't always protect their money, and how a single trader identified a weakness that experts said didn't exist. What you're about to discover will change how you see every economic crisis that's happened since, because this story, it's the blueprint. Imagine it's 1990. The Berlin Wall has just fallen. The Soviet Union is collapsing. And across Europe, politicians are dreaming of something unprecedented. A unified European economy. One currency, one central bank, one financial powerhouse to rival America. The plan is called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, the ERM. Think of it as Europe's training wheels before the full launch of the euro. Countries agree to keep their currencies trading within tight bands against each other. If your currency gets too weak, your central bank buys it back to prop up the price. Too strong? You sell it to bring the value down. Britain joins in October 1990 at a rate of 2.95 German marks to 1 British pound. The problem? The rate is completely wrong from day one. Margaret Thatcher warns against it. She calls it a German racket designed to take over the whole of Europe. But she's pushed aside by her own party. John Major, her successor as Prime Minister, is convinced that European unity is Britain's future. Major is the opposite of Thatcher. Mild-mannered, conciliatory. A former banker who genuinely believes in cooperation over confrontation. His Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont, shares this vision. Here's what nobody tells you. Lamont doesn't even believe in the ERM privately. Years later, he'll admit he thought it was flawed from the start. But in 1992, he defends it like his life depends on it. Because politically, it does. The British economy is already sick. Unemployment is rising. Inflation is stubborn. Manufacturing is struggling. Housing prices are collapsing. The UK has just fought an expensive war in Iraq, the Gulf War, and the bill is coming due. To stay in the ERM, Britain needs to keep interest rates high, really high. This makes borrowing expensive, which crushes businesses and homeowners. Thousands of families are losing their homes to foreclosure. But the government insists, we must stay the course. We must prove we're committed to Europe. Meanwhile, Germany has its own problems. They've just reunified. East and West Germany are now one country again. It's costing them billions. The Bundesbank, Germany's central bank, is raising interest rates to control inflation. This makes the German mark stronger. Here's the trap. When Germany's currency gets stronger, everyone else in the ERM has to make their currencies stronger too, or they'll fall outside the agreed bands. That means raising interest rates even higher. Britain is being forced to strangle its own economy to keep a promise to Europe. But everything was about to change. 3,000 miles away, in a glass tower in Manhattan, George Soros is watching. Born in Budapest in 1930, Soros survived the Nazi occupation by using forged papers. After the war, he escaped communism, arrived in London penniless, and worked his way through the London School of Economics, washing dishes. He learned early that when systems are unstable, massive opportunities appear for those brave, or ruthless, enough to see them. By 1992, Soros manages the Quantum Fund, $15 billion in assets. His specialty? Macroeconomic bets. He doesn't trade individual stocks. He bets on entire economies rising or falling. Currencies, bonds, interest rates. the big picture. His chief strategist is a man named Stanley Druckenmiller, and in the summer of 1992, Druckenmiller notices something interesting. The British pound is overvalued, he tells Soros. Their economy can't support this exchange rate. They're going to have to devalue or leave the ERM. Soros studies the data. British inflation, 4%. German inflation, 3%. British unemployment, rising. German unemployment, stable. British manufacturing, declining. German manufacturing, growing. The pound should be trading at 2.5 marks, maybe 2.6. Instead, it's stuck at 2.95 because of political promises. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually, physics wins. What nobody realized was that the British government had already lost this fight months ago. They just didn't know it yet.
Through July and August, currency traders worldwide start testing the pound. Small bets at first. Selling pounds, buying marks. The Bank of England fights back, spending billions to buy pounds and support the price. It works. Barely. The Bank of England has about $44 billion in foreign currency reserves. That sounds like a lot. It's not. On September 3rd, the Italian lira starts collapsing. Italy is also in the ERM, facing the same pressures as Britain. The Bundesbank president, a man named Helmut Schlesinger, gives an interview to the Wall Street Journal Europe. He says something that changes everything. Further realignments of ERM currencies cannot be ruled out. In plain English, some currencies in the ERM are going to have to devalue. Everyone immediately knows he's talking about Britain and Italy. Currency traders read this as a green light. If the head of Germany's central bank thinks devaluations are coming, that's basically inside information. On September 8th, the selling accelerates. Norman Lamont goes on television. He looks directly into the camera and says, quote, "I will do whatever is necessary to keep Britain in the ERM. There will be no devaluation, no leaving the exchange rate mechanism. We are absolutely committed." Traders watch this and think, he's bluffing. The Bank of England raises interest rates from 10% to 12% on September 10th.
It's an emergency move. Mortgage holders scream in pain. The pound stabilizes for about 3 days. September 14th, the dam breaks on Italy. The lira collapses. Italy devalues by 7% overnight. The ERM is fracturing. That night, Soros makes his decision. He calls his traders. Maximum position, he says. Bet everything. But the real catastrophe hadn't even begun. September 16th, Wednesday, the day that will become known as Black Wednesday. At 6:30 a.m. London time, Quantum Fund begins executing its strategy. They're not just selling British pounds, they're shorting them. Here's how it works, and this is crucial to understand. Imagine I borrow your car and immediately sell it for $10,000. Tomorrow, if cars crash in value, I can buy an identical car for $7,000, return it to you, and pocket $3,000 in profit. That's short selling. Soros is doing this with 7 billion pounds sterling, over 10 billion US dollars. He borrows pounds from banks, immediately sells them for German marks, and waits for the price to collapse. When it does, he'll buy them back cheaper and return them. The difference is pure profit. Within the first hour, the Quantum Fund has sold 2 billion pounds. That's a big number. But here's the thing, they're not alone.
Currency traders in New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Frankfurt, they all see what Soros is doing. And they pile on. It's like watching sharks circle. The smell of blood in the water attracts more sharks. By 9 a.m., 5 billion pounds have been sold into the market. The pound's value is plummeting. It's approaching the bottom of its ERM band, 2.778 marks. Inside the Bank of England, Governor Robin Lee Pemberton is on crisis calls with the Treasury. They have one weapon: buy pounds with their foreign currency reserves to push the price back up. They start buying 1 billion pounds, 2 billion, 3 billion. The price barely moves. They're trying to stop an avalanche with a shovel. Norman Lamont arrives at the Treasury at 10:15 a.m. He looks exhausted. He hasn't slept. His private secretary hands him a note with 3 words. It's not working. Lamont's first instinct is to call the Germans. "You have to cut your interest rates," he tells Schlesinger. "Help us out here. We're on the same team." Schlesinger refuses. "The Bundesbank answers to the German economy, not to Britain," he says, which is technically correct, but also, brutal.
By 11 a.m., the Bank of England has spent over $15 billion defending the pound. They have maybe $25 billion left. At this rate, they'll be out of ammunition by mid-afternoon. Here's what makes this so crazy. The government can't tell anyone they're running out of reserves. The moment traders know the bank is almost broke, it's game over. Everyone will sell at once. So they have to keep pretending they can fight forever while secretly knowing they're hours away from surrender. Lamont calls an emergency meeting. Prime Minister John Major attends by secure phone from a campaign event. There's a local election happening and he can't be seen panicking. What are our options? Major asks.
The Treasury advisor explains. We can raise interest rates again, make it so expensive to borrow pounds that people will want to hold them instead of selling them. Translation, we can destroy the British economy to save face on a European promise. At 11:45 a.m., the government announces an emergency rate hike from 12% to 15%. 15%. That means if you have a £200,000 mortgage, your monthly payment just increased by £2,000 overnight. Businesses can't borrow to make payroll. The entire economy is being sacrificed. And then, something happened that changed everything. The 15% interest rate announcement should have worked. In theory, it should have scared everyone into holding pounds. It had the opposite effect. Traders looked at that number and thought, the British government is so desperate, they're willing to commit economic suicide. They're finished. The selling accelerated. By noon, George Soros had expanded his position to $10 billion. His fund was now short almost the entire $44 billion in Bank of England reserves. One man was betting against an entire country and winning. Later, when asked how he felt in that moment, Soros said, I felt no nervousness at all. I was calm. I felt we were right, and events would prove us right. The government had made promises they couldn't keep. That's the thing about Soros. He's not a gambler. He's a philosopher who happens to trade currencies. He doesn't bet unless the odds are overwhelmingly in his favor. News cameras are gathering outside the Bank of England and Treasury. Reporters smell blood. They're not sure exactly what's happening yet, but they know something massive is going down. Inside the Treasury, Norman Lamont is chain-smoking in violation of building regulations. His career is disintegrating in real time. At 12:30 p.m., he gets a call from Eddie George, the deputy governor of the Bank of England. George is a career central banker, calm, professional, precise. If he's rattled, things are truly dire. Chancellor, George says, we've spent $27 billion. We have perhaps 4 hours of reserves left at the current selling rate. After that, we have nothing. $27 billion. Gone. In 6 hours. Lamont asked the question everyone's avoiding. What happens if we just stop defending it? What if we let the pound float? Silence on the line. We'd be violating our ERM commitments, George finally says. The pound would crash. We'd look weak. The political consequences would be severe. And if we keep fighting, we'll lose everything, and the pound will crash anyway. They're discussing national surrender on a phone call. At 1:15 p.m., something unexpected happens. The German Bundesbank, seeing Britain's agony, makes a gesture. They lower their interest rates by 1/4 point. It's too little, too late, but it's something. The pound rallies slightly for about 20 minutes. Traders see it as a dead cat bounce, the brief uptick before the final collapse. By 2 p.m., reality sets in. Major, Lamont, and their advisors gather for a crisis meeting. The choices are stark. Option 1, keep fighting. Raise interest rates to 20% or even 25%. Bankrupt half the country. Maybe hold the pound for another day or two before reserves run out completely. Option 2, surrender. Announce Britain is leaving the ERM. Let the pound crash. Accept total political humiliation. One advisor suggests a middle path. What if we suspend ERM membership temporarily? Say it's a pause, not a withdrawal. Lamont shakes his head. Nobody will believe that. Once we're out, we're out. Here's what most people don't know.
John Major had actually decided to leave the ERM days earlier. He'd told Lamont privately on September 14th that the system was unsustainable. But they wanted to wait until after Italy collapsed first, so Britain wouldn't be the one to break ranks. By waiting, they turned an orderly exit into a catastrophic collapse. At 3:30 p.m., with reserves dwindling below $20 billion, the Bank of England stops defending the pound. They just stop buying. The pound goes into freefall. 2.8 marks, 2.7, 2.65. In minutes, it loses 10% of its value. And Soros? Every time the pound drops 1 penny, his fund makes $80 million. At 4:30 p.m., the government makes it official. Norman Lamont walks to the microphone outside the Treasury. Camera shutters click like machine guns. He reads from a prepared statement, his voice steady, but his hands trembling. Today has been an extremely difficult day. The government has concluded that Britain's best interests are served by suspending our membership in the European exchange rate mechanism. In the next 24 hours, the true cost of this decision would become clear. The announcement hits at 4:45 p.m. London time. Trading floors around the world erupt. In New York, where it's only 11:45 a.m., traders are screaming orders. The British pound isn't just falling anymore. It's in freefall. 2.6 marks, 2.5, 2.45. George Soros and his team are methodically closing their positions. They're buying back pounds at crashed prices to return the ones they borrowed. With each transaction, the profit counter in their system ticks higher. Stanley Druckenmiller later described this moment. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. The only question was how much to shoot. By the time the sun sets on London that Wednesday, Quantum Fund has made over $1 billion. $1 billion in a single day. But here's what they never tell you in the history books. Soros wasn't the only one who made money that day. Other hedge funds piled on. Louis Bacon's More Capital made $300 million. Bruce Kovner's Caxton Associates made another $300 million. Smaller funds made $50 million, $100 million each. Conservative estimates put the total profit made by currency speculators on Black Wednesday at over $4 billion. Britain's loss was their gain, literally transferred from British taxpayers to private traders. That night, Norman Lamont goes home to his flat in Westminster. His security detail tells reporters that the Chancellor is resting and will make no further statements tonight. Inside, Lamont pours himself a whiskey and watches the news. Every channel is covering it. Britain's darkest day. The pound's Black Wednesday. Major government in crisis. Opposition leader Tony Blair is already calling for Lamont's resignation. John Major is at Downing Street, meeting with advisors until 3 a.m. The political calculation is brutal. Should Lamont resign? Should Major himself resign? Who takes the blame? One advisor makes a point that's coldly accurate. If we'd stayed in the ERM, we'd have destroyed the economy anyway. At least this way, we can cut interest rates and recover. It's true, but it doesn't make the humiliation any less severe. The next morning's newspapers are savage. The Sun, Britain's largest tabloid, runs the headline, "Now we've all been hung out to dry." The Times uses one word in enormous letters: capitulation. In Germany, newspapers barely contain their schadenfreude. The Frankfurter Allgemeine writes, "Britain has learned that you cannot defy economic reality with political rhetoric." September 17th, the day after. The Bank of England officially cuts interest rates back to 12%. By October, they'll be down to 10%, where they should have been all along. Here's what they didn't tell the public for years afterward. In 1995, classified documents from the Bank of England were quietly released under Freedom of Information rules. They revealed something explosive. The bank's own economists had warned in June '92, 3 months before Black Wednesday, that the pound was overvalued and the ERM position was unsustainable. An internal memo from chief economist Andrew Crockett to Governor Lee Pemberton stated clearly, current sterling exchange rate, approximately 10 to 15% above equilibrium. Maintaining ERM commitment will require either economic recession or eventual realignment. Recommend strategic planning for orderly exit. They knew. They knew the whole time. Major and Lamont weren't blindsided by Soros. They were playing political theater, hoping that somehow reality would bend to their will. They gambled billions of taxpayer pounds on wishful thinking. But the revelation goes deeper. In 2005, former Bundesbank president Hans Tietmeyer gave an interview to Financial Times Deutschland.
He admitted that German central bankers knew Britain couldn't hold the pound at 2.95 marks. "We told them privately in July that the rate was wrong," Tietmeyer said. "We suggested they should realign within the ERM, devalue by 8 to 10% voluntarily, and stay in the system. They refused because they thought it would be politically embarrassing." So Britain could have devalued gracefully in July, saved billions, avoided catastrophe. Instead, they chose pride over pragmatism and lost everything anyway. But here's the truly mind-blowing part that historians still debate. What if Black Wednesday wasn't actually a catastrophe at all? Within 6 months of leaving the ERM, the British economy began recovering. Freed from the obligation to keep interest rates artificially high, the Bank of England cut rates to 6% by 1993. Businesses could borrow again. Housing recovered. Unemployment dropped. By 1994, Britain's GDP growth was outpacing Germany's. By 1997, the UK was in a full-blown economic boom. Norman Lamont himself said in his memoirs, "That day was a political disaster, but an economic liberation. Leaving the ERM was the best thing that happened to Britain in the 90s. Think about that. The man who was crucified for Black Wednesday now believes it saved the country. Some economists now argue that Soros did Britain a favor. He forced a decision that politicians were too afraid to make. The £3.3 billion Britain lost in reserves, it was a one-time cost. The economic damage from staying in the ERM would have been far worse." There's even a conspiracy theory that Margaret Thatcher secretly hoped the ERM would fail to vindicate her opposition to it. Documents show she gave speeches attacking the system right up until Black Wednesday, almost as if she was trying to undermine it. We'll never know for sure, but here's what we do know. Black Wednesday killed Britain's enthusiasm for European integration. The push for monetary union, the dream of Britain joining the euro, died that day. When the euro launched in 1999, Britain stayed out. When referendums were held on deeper EU integration, the British public said no. The memory of September 16, 1992 was seared into the national consciousness. Don't tie your economy to political promises you can't keep. Some historians draw a direct line from Black Wednesday to Brexit in 2016. The humiliation of that day created a generation of British Eurosceptics who never trusted the European project again. As for George Soros, the billion-dollar profit transformed him from a successful investor into a global figure. He used the money to fund his Open Society foundations, which have spent over $32 billion on pro-democracy initiatives worldwide. Ironically, the man who, quote, broke England has spent decades trying to strengthen democratic institutions globally. He's funded journalism in authoritarian countries, supported human rights organizations, and bankrolled pro-democracy movements from Eastern Europe to Asia. Of course, this has also made him one of the most controversial figures alive. He's been accused of meddling in other countries' politics, called a puppet master by critics, blamed for everything from financial crises to political upheavals. Conspiracy theories about him are legion, most of them anti-Semitic garbage. But Soros himself seems unbothered. When asked about the criticism, he shrugs. "I made my money understanding how markets work. Now I spend it trying to make societies work better. If that bothers people, so be it." The immediate aftermath of Black Wednesday showed something profound about modern economics. In the battle between markets and governments, markets will always win if the government is defending an untenable position. You can't command an economy to do something it fundamentally cannot do. You can try for a while, spend billions, raise interest rates, make promises, but eventually, reality wins. And when reality wins, someone always profits from the gap between wishful thinking and truth. The immediate aftermath of Black Wednesday was chaotic. Within 48 hours, Italy also crashed out of the ERM. Spain devalued the peseta 3 times in 6 months. The entire system was teetering. France held on by implementing capital controls, basically making it illegal to move large amounts of money out of francs. It worked, barely, but it required turning France into a temporary economic fortress. By 1993, the ERM had to be completely restructured. The currency bands were widened from 2.25% to 15%. At that point, you might as well not have a system at all. But the damage went beyond economics. The political fallout reshaped Europe. The Maastricht Treaty, which was supposed to create the European Union, almost collapsed. Denmark had already voted against it in June 1992. After Black Wednesday, French voters nearly rejected it too. It passed by only 51% to 49%. Britain's relationship with Europe never recovered. Major managed to hang on as prime minister until 1997, but his party was poisoned by internal warfare over Europe. The Conservative Party split into pro-Europe and anti-Europe factions that still exist today. Norman Lamont resigned as chancellor in May 1993. His replacement, Kenneth Clarke, immediately cut interest rates to 5% and launched an economic stimulus program. By 1994, Britain was growing again. Lamont later wrote in his memoirs, "The irony is that everything I was trying to achieve with the ERM, low inflation, stable growth, economic credibility, we achieved after we left it. We fought to stay in a system that was preventing us from succeeding." The Bank of England itself underwent radical reform. The embarrassment of Black Wednesday led to the Bank of England Act 1998, which granted the bank operational independence from the government. No longer could politicians force the bank to defend unsustainable policies. This is actually a massive change. The Bank of England had been under direct government control since its founding in 1694. Black Wednesday was such a disaster that it triggered 3 centuries of precedent to be overturned. International markets learned a lesson too. Fixed exchange rate systems are vulnerable to speculative attacks. Within a decade, currency crises hit Mexico, 1994, Southeast Asia, 1997, Russia, 1998, and Argentina, 2001. Every single one followed the Black Wednesday playbook. Governments defending an unsustainable currency peg, speculators attacking, reserves depleting, eventual collapse. George Soros himself became a target. When Thailand's currency crashed in 1997, triggering the Asian financial crisis, Thai officials blamed evil speculators led by Soros. Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad called Soros a villain and a moron. Soros responded by pointing out that Asian countries had borrowed billions in dollars but earned revenue in local currencies. When their currencies fell, they couldn't pay back their debts. That's not speculation. That's mathematics. The personal toll on those involved is rarely discussed. Norman Lamont suffered depression after his resignation. His political career was over at 60. He later said the stress of Black Wednesday gave him nightmares for years. John Major lost the 1997 election in a landslide, one of the worst conservative defeats in history. Labour won a 179-seat majority. Major resigned as party leader the next day. For Britain's citizens, the recovery was slow but real. Interest rates dropped, making mortgages affordable again. By 1995, the housing market had recovered. By 1997, Britain was in the longest economic expansion since the 1950s. But trust in institutions had been shattered. The Bank of England's credibility took years to rebuild. The government's competence was permanently questioned. And somewhere in that gap, that broken trust between citizens and institutions, the seeds of future upheavals were planted. Today, Black Wednesday is studied in every economics program as a case study in speculative attacks. The lessons are clear. Don't defend the indefensible. Don't let politics override economics, and never underestimate market forces. But the implications go far beyond textbooks. The euro launched successfully in 1999, but Britain stayed out. Every economic debate since, should Britain join? Should Britain leave? Referenced Black Wednesday. The memory of that day became Britain's economic trauma. When Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016, many analysts pointed back to 1992. The distrust of European integration that Black Wednesday created never fully healed. In that sense, Soros's $1 billion bet changed the course of British history for decades. Modern currency trading has become exponentially larger. In 1992, the daily volume of foreign exchange trading was about $1 trillion. Today, $7 trillion, every single day. Soros's $10 billion position would be pocket change in today's markets. If Black Wednesday happened now, the amounts would be 10 times larger, the speed 10 times faster. The tools that detected Britain's vulnerability, economic analysis, market sentiment, political intelligence, are now automated. AI algorithms scan every central bank statement, every economic indicator, every political speech, looking for mismatches between official policy and economic reality. In 2010, similar speculative attacks hit the Eurozone. Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy all faced currency crises.
Well, sort of. They couldn't devalue because they all used the euro. So instead, their government bonds crashed, their economies tanked, and millions of people suffered unemployment. Some economists argue that if those countries had their own currencies, they could have done a Britain, devalued, recovered quickly, and moved on. Instead, locked into the euro, they endured years of depression-level economics. Black Wednesday proved that currency flexibility has value. Economic sovereignty matters. Being able to set your own interest rates matters. The lesson applies today to any country trying to peg its currency to another. If your economy is fundamentally different from the currency you're pegged to, you're vulnerable. Markets will find the weakness. Someone will profit from it. Here's what's eerie. Right now, China has its currency, the yuan, partially controlled. They allow it to trade within bands against the dollar, but the Chinese government intervenes constantly to maintain the peg. Sound familiar? Many economists believe the yuan is overvalued by 10 to 20%. China has $4 trillion in reserves to defend it. But if a coalition of hedge funds decided to attack the yuan the way Soros attacked the pound, we'd be talking about the largest financial battle in history. Soros himself is now 95 years old. He's handed over management of his fund to others, but his philosophy, finding mismatches between perception and reality, betting big when you're right, and not apologizing, remains influential. The final irony? Britain's economy did better outside the ERM than inside it. And Britain's economy has done fine outside the EU, too. The thing everyone said would be catastrophic, leaving European economic systems, turned out to be survivable both times. Maybe the real lesson of Black Wednesday isn't about currency mechanics or trading strategies. Maybe it's about the danger of letting political commitments override economic reality, about the cost of pride, about how sometimes losing a battle saves you from losing the war, and about how one man's catastrophe can be another man's opportunity, if you're willing to see what others refuse to admit. So the next time someone tells you that markets and governments are equal opponents, remember September 16th, 1992. Remember that $44 billion in reserves lasted exactly one trading day. Remember that one man saw what an entire government refused to admit. George Soros didn't break the Bank of England. The British government broke itself by defending an impossible position. Soros just had the courage, or ruthlessness, to profit from their mistake. The line between financial genius and economic villain is often just a matter of perspective. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this video with more people who need to understand how money and power really work. Subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that changed history. Because these stories aren't just about the past, they're blueprints for understanding the present. Next week, we're covering the time one trader lost $4.9 billion and brought down a 230-year-old bank in a single weekend. The Barings Bank collapse. Trust me, you won't believe how it happened. Final question to leave you with. If you could go back to September 16th, 1992, knowing what you know now, would you have made the same trade Soros did? Or would the weight of bankrupting millions be too much? Let me know in the comments.